My son tried to sell my house behind my back, so I sold something he loved instead. I opened my laptop and my heart stopped. The listing showed my house, my front steps, my white curtains, my own garden bench, all in bright photos taken without my permission. The seller's name read Mark, my son. The asking price was so low I felt sick. I clicked again and again, sure it was a mistake. The description said charming, easy living, like it was not my life but a thing to be moved. I called Mark fast. It went straight to answer. I texted. No answer. I scrolled through the pictures and froze on one of the living room where my late husband's toolbox sat. Someone had walked through my rooms and laughed at my things. A cold fear crawled up my arms. I wanted to scream, but my voice was small. I knew I needed to stop this. My name is Evelyn Hart. If you want more true revenge stories like this, hit subscribe now. I called Mark, and he answered in a tone I didn't know. He sounded calm, like someone else's child. It's better for you to downsize, Mom, he said. I asked him why my home was listed. He said he had handled everything. I felt my hands tremble and I asked, "Who gave you permission?" He laughed softly and said, "Don't worry, I took care of it." I drove over immediately, my old sedan, hurrying down the street like it had a purpose. When I pulled in, Mark stood on the porch in his neat shirt. He sounded polite and assured. He said, "I scheduled showings. People will see it today." My head spun. I thought of the years I had kept the house for our family, the way my husband and I stayed up fixing the roof, saving pennies for paint. I felt small and betrayed by the son I raised to be kind, not like this. I walked inside and strangers were in my kitchen, walking through the rooms like it was a museum. A woman held a clipboard, asking questions about the appliances. A buyer asked if the old lady comes with the house. I felt hot and then cold. Mark's fiancée, Lila, stood near the window in a bright dress and whispered loudly so I could hear. "She's too old to keep this place." My heart hurt. I moved to the living room where my husband's portrait hung and saw people pointing at the crown molding as if it were a prize. I tried to speak, to explain, but the agent said it was a scheduled open house. Mark smiled at me like he was sorry and then turned to show the room. Lila's eyes slid to mine and there was no softness. I wanted to gather my life into my arms and leave, but the buyers kept asking if the neighborhood was quiet enough for retirees, like I was not human. I felt swallowed by a house that suddenly did not feel mine. After the open house, I pulled Mark aside. He looked tired but not sorry. I asked him how he could put my home on the market without telling me. He looked at me with plain calm and said, "I forged your signature. I just wanted to speed things up." The words hit me like a slap. He said it was better for me to move to a smaller place and be safe. I felt lightheaded and sat on the porch step. I tried to understand why my son would do this. He said it was for my good and for their wedding, like that made it okay. Lila walked by and smirked, then said, "You should thank him." The smirk cut deeper than the forged pen. I remembered when I taught him to tie his shoes, when he cried when he scraped his knee. This felt like a betrayal colored by an easy cruelty. I wanted answers. I wanted my house back. That night a neighbor slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a big wedding invoice with lines and lines of numbers. I read it twice, then 3 times, not believing. It named the venue Lila wanted, a fancy place with chandeliers and a price that made my breath stop. The note with it said, "They need the cash now." I felt a cold anger grow in my chest. I remembered my husband and how we paid small bills and counted pennies, how we never let greed shape our family. I sat on my porch swing and the moon looked small and mean. I called an old friend, Joe, who had known Mark since he was a boy. He came by the next morning with a folder and a look on his face that said trouble. The folder held debts and loan papers tied to Mark. He whispered, "He owes a lot of people." I stopped crying then. I felt a new thing, a slow, steady planning fire in my belly. I woke to my phone buzzing and found screenshots of a group chat that made my stomach drop. Lila's messages were cruel and quick. "She'll forget soon enough. She forgets everything." Mark replied with laughing emojis and a heart. Other messages showed them planning how to speed this up and how Grandma will never know. I read each line until the letters blurred. I felt sick and angry in equal measure. I had changed bandages, packed lunches, and read bedtime stories for Mark. I had given him money for college and stayed up nights worrying when he missed calls. Now they treated me like a thing to discard. I wanted to storm to their house and demand an apology, but Joe warned me not to act in anger. He taped the screenshots into my folder and said quietly, "This will help." The folder felt heavy in my lap. I realized I was not only hurt, but also in danger of losing everything I'd worked for. I wiped my face and promised myself I would fight back. That afternoon, Mark called in a voice sharpened by anger and threat. He said if I ruined the sale, he would force me into assisted living. He sounded sure, like he had already planned it. He sent a brochure for a facility with neat beds and bland rooms. The words "for your safety" were typed like a legal verdict. I felt my hands go cold and my heart pound hard enough to hurt. I remember my husband's voice, telling me to keep careful papers and not to let anyone control my life. I held the brochure and thought of rooms with locked doors where I might be told what to wear and when to eat. The threat felt like final erasure. I called my lawyer's office and left a message, but I also called Joe, who said he'd come by. I sat on the porch swing and watched the street like it might give me back my son. I felt small but determined. This was not how my story ended. I sat on the porch and whispered to the wind, "Why my own son?" Memories came like old photographs. I saw Mark at 5, smeared with jam, laughing as I tied his shoes. I remembered nights I stayed up when he had fevers, and the way he had hugged me after his first day of school. I also remember my husband whispering before he died that I should keep our papers safe and never sign anything important without reading. I had done my best to raise Mark with kindness and honesty. I had never taught him to take what wasn't his. I rocked gently and let the porch swing squeak. The pain was sharp and raw. I thought of promises I had made to my husband to protect our home for our family and to never let greed break us. A small flame of planning began to grow inside me. I could cry or I could act. I chose action. I stood up, feeling steadier than before, and walked inside to look for the old papers my husband had kept. Joe arrived with a slow, serious look and handed me a small folder. He'd always been steady, a neighbor who fixed fences and kept promises. He sat at my kitchen table and told me what he had found. Mark's name on several IOUs, small loans with steep interest, and threats from people I had never met. The folder showed text messages where Mark bragged about cashing out on Mom's house and how he just needed one big sale to clear his debts. Joe said quietly, "I didn't know you knew, but he's been selling the idea that you'll never notice." I felt dizzy. I had kept quiet about money and gifts and always wanted to trust Mark, but now trust had turned to a paper trail. Joe pressed his palm on mine and said, "You're not alone." He promised to be with me in meetings and to help sort the papers. I felt gratitude and a fresh strength. The betrayal still hurt, but with Joe and the folder, the path to fight back was clearer. I opened the final envelope in the folder and found a stack of invoices and a large wedding bill with Lila's name in bold at the top. The numbers were huge, and they made me feel foolish for ever thinking my gifts were only kindness. Mark had been using promises and my money to build a life that would leave me empty. I placed the papers on the kitchen table and felt a steady heat inside my chest. The house that had held birthdays and quiet mornings was at risk because of a wedding ring and a craving for luxury. I paced and thought about the memory box my husband had left, the papers and deeds we kept safe. I had a memory that felt like a promise. We had written that all our assets were to remain for the family unless changes were agreed on. I did not know the details, but I believed there had to be a paper that could stop Mark. I grabbed my keys and said, "No more waiting." I would find that document and stop the sale. I took the documents to the real estate office the next morning. The agent looked nervous when she saw my face. She closed her door quickly and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." I asked her what Mark had told her. She swallowed hard and said he claimed I was mentally declining and needed help making choices. My chest burned with anger. She said she asked him to bring proof, but he convinced her by telling a long story about my forgetting things. She said she feared legal trouble now. I slid the folder Joe gave me across her desk and watched her eyes widen at the signatures Mark had forged. She covered her mouth. "I didn't know it was like this." I told her the sale was over. She nodded fast, saying she would cancel everything and file a report. When I walked out, I felt my spine straighten a little. It was the first step in taking back control. One lie down, many more to break apart. I went to the bank next. The manager greeted me kindly but looked tense when he pulled up my file. He told me someone had tried to access my accounts recently. My heart dropped when he said my son's name. Mark had submitted forms to transfer funds and tried to withdraw a large amount, but he failed because he guessed my password wrong. The manager slid a paper toward me. It was a withdrawal slip with my name scribbled in shaky handwriting. My fake signature. I felt my cheeks burn as I stared at it. I asked when it happened. He said it was the same week the house listing went up. I nodded slowly, feeling both angry and strangely calm. I asked him to freeze all access except mine. He clicked a few keys and said, "Done." Leaving the bank, I walked to my car with the paper in my hand. It fluttered in the wind like a warning. My son had already tried to take my home. Now he had tried to take my money too. At home I called my insurance company because something felt off. The woman on the phone spoke gently as she explained that a family member had changed my life insurance plan last month. She paused before saying, "You're no longer the primary beneficiary." My breath caught. I asked who was listed now. She read the name Lila, my son's fiancée. My fingers tightened around the phone. I felt a strange coldness spread through me. They had planned everything. The house, the money, the policies. I asked the woman to restore my account and put a password on it. She did, and then said, "You're not the first senior to deal with this." That sentence stung, because I didn't think of myself as someone who could be tricked. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet living room, looking at the framed pictures of Mark when he was small. I wondered when the boy with soft eyes had become the man who could erase me. I whispered, "This ends now," into the empty room. Joe came over again, carrying a small speaker. He said he had something I needed to hear. He pressed play, and Mark's voice filled my kitchen. My son was talking to a friend, bragging. "Once the house is sold, she'll have to do what we say. She won't fight. She never does." My hands shook so hard I had to grip the chair. He laughed in the recording, like he was proud of fooling me. I felt grief swell and break inside me. Joe paused the audio and asked if I was okay. I shook my head no. I wanted to scream, but only a small sound came out. The boy I raised to be humble was now laughing about trapping me. I listened again, this time without crying. Every word became evidence. Every smug laugh became fuel. I told Joe, "This is the truth now, not the boy I remember." He nodded. I knew then that the fight was real. I also knew I could win it. That evening, my neighbor sent me a long message. Lila had posted online, saying I was unstable and violent. She wrote that she feared for her safety living so close to me. Hurt shot through me like a sharp blade. The comments rolled in fast. Some said, "Poor girl, and older people can get scary." But then a stranger commented, "That's not true. I've seen her. She's kind." Others followed, saying they didn't believe the story. It was small comfort, but it helped. I watched the lies spread and felt my cheeks burn. I walked to the porch and breathed the cool night air, wishing my husband were there to hold my hands. I felt anger, but under it was something stronger, clarity. Lies only last when no one fights them. I wiped my face and went inside. I opened my notebook and began writing down everything. Dates, threats, lies, each piece of evidence. If they wanted a fight, they picked the wrong woman. The next morning I received a private message from someone I didn't know. It read, "I know what they're planning. Please meet me." I stared at it for a long time. The name was Emily. I didn't know her. I showed the message to Joe, and he said he'd come with me. We met her at a cafe near the water. She was nervous, twisting her hands as she spoke. "I used to work with Lila," she said. "I heard things." She leaned forward and whispered, "She's done this before. She picks people with assets. She makes them trust her, then she pushes the family to give her access." My stomach turned. Emily slid a small envelope to me. "These are copies of messages she sent about you. And about the house." I thanked her, and she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it was until now." When we left the cafe, I held the envelope tight. I felt fear. Yes, but also a new sense of power growing inside me. Back home, I opened the envelope Emily gave me. Inside were printouts of messages Lila sent years ago about another family. The words were cruel and familiar. She used the same tricks. Lies about declining health, fake worry, pushing for access to property. She bragged about getting someone else to pay for her old engagement ring. I felt sick realizing I wasn't her first target. It made everything clearer. The charm, the soft voice, the perfect smiles. She had practiced all of it. I wondered if Mark knew or if he was simply blind and in love. I sat with the papers spread on my dining table, my heart beating fast. The weight of truth sat heavy but sharp. I knew I needed to gather everything. Every message, every threat, every lie. I began sorting the papers into piles. Joe helped me label them. When we finished, I looked at the piles and thought, they don't know who they're dealing with. It was time to stop being afraid. It was time to fight. That afternoon, the fancy wedding venue called me. The woman on the line sounded cheerful. Hi, we're just checking when you'll be paying your half of the deposit. My half. I almost dropped the phone. I asked her what she meant. She said Mark and Lila told them I agreed to pay half the wedding cost, and that I'd send the money this week. I felt a deep flare of anger. I told her I never agreed to anything. The woman grew quiet and said she would update the file. I hung up and stood still. They had used my name again, without thought, without respect. I walked to my husband's old desk and opened the drawers. Papers he left were tucked in envelopes with labels. I pulled out the one marked, House Plus Assets. It felt heavier than I remembered. If they thought I was weak, they forgot who built this home with their bare hands. I opened the envelope slowly, knowing something inside could change everything. Inside the envelope were documents my husband and I signed years ago. One page held a note in his handwriting. It said I had full control of all our assets if anything happened to him. It also said nothing could be sold or changed without my written approval. My breath caught. I realized Mark didn't know this paper existed. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because my husband had trusted me to protect everything we built. Relief because now I could. I traced his handwriting with my finger. I remembered the day he wrote it. He had said, just in case. Back then I laughed, saying we didn't need it. Now I saw how wise he had been. I folded the document and placed it carefully into the evidence folder. This was the key. This was the thing that could stop Mark and Lila completely. I stood slowly and whispered, "Thank you," to the empty room. My husband had protected me even now. I sat at the table with the memory box closed and the folder full. My heart no longer shook. Everything finally made sense. The lies, the pressure, the threats. I knew what Mark wanted. I knew what Lila planned. But I also knew they underestimated me. I picked up my phone and called a lawyer Joe recommended. When the receptionist asked what the call was about, I said, "I need to protect my home and my assets." My voice sounded calm and strong. She set an appointment for the next day. After the call, I stood at the window and looked out at my yard, the garden I planted with my husband, the swing he built for Mark when he was small. I whispered, "It's time he learns what I'm capable of." No more tears. No more fear. Just a plan. I gathered all the evidence and put it in a neat binder. When I closed it, it felt like closing the door on the weak version of myself. The real fight would begin now. My lawyer, Ms. Carter, listened quietly as I laid out everything, the forged signatures, the lies, the house listing, the threats. She looked calm but firm. When I finished, she said, "You have far more power here than they think." She explained my options. Press charges, freeze assets, reverse any sale attempts, even file a restraining order if needed. But one option stood out, a legal move that would hit Mark hardest while keeping everything clean and proper. She slid the papers toward me. "This lets you take back full control and block any attempt they make." I read carefully, remembering my husband's advice. My hands didn't shake this time. I signed each page slowly, letting the pen press deep. Ms. Carter said, "Once this goes through, nothing can be sold without your approval." I nodded and stood. I felt taller. As I walked out of her office, I whispered, "It's my turn now." The plan had begun. I went to Mark's house that evening. He opened the door looking confident, almost proud. I forced a tired smile and said softly, "You win. I won't fight the sale." His eyebrows jumped. Then he laughed, clapped his hands, and called for Lila. She rushed out and hugged him, not me. They didn't notice the calm in my voice. They only saw surrender. Mark said, "See? That wasn't so hard." I nodded and said nothing. As I turned to leave, he was already pulling out his phone. By the time I reached my car, he had posted online. Finally! Mom's agreeing to move. Proud of her for accepting help. The comments cheered him on. I stared at the screen and felt a small smile grow. He thought he had won. He didn't know the documents were already filed, blocking every step he thought he controlled. He had no idea the trap was set, and he had stepped right into it himself. 2 days later, Mark invited me to a meeting with a potential buyer so it all goes smoothly. I went along calmly. The buyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a blue coat, shook my hand. We sat at the table, and she began asking questions. I answered kindly, even sweetly. Mark spoke over me twice, calling me forgetful. I smiled. When the buyer asked if everything was legally ready, I said gently, "Actually, a few things recently changed." Mark froze. I didn't explain more. I didn't need to. The buyer opened her folder, checked something, then suddenly stood. "I'm withdrawing my offer." Mark shot up from his chair. "Why?" She only said, "New information." She left without shaking his hand. Mark turned to me with wide eyes. I shrugged. Sometimes plans fall apart. Inside, I felt steady. The documents I signed had reached the right hands. The buyer knew she couldn't legally buy anything now. Lila would explode when she found out. I walked out before Mark asked anything else. That evening, Lila stood on my lawn screaming, "You ruined everything." Her face was twisted with rage. Mark stood behind her, silent and pale. She stormed toward me, waving her hands. "That buyer was perfect. Do you know how hard it is to get someone ready to pay fast?" I simply folded my arms. No house sale, no wedding venue, no plan. "You destroyed it." She stomped closer, but I didn't flinch. I looked her in the eye and said softly, "No, dear. I haven't even started." She blinked, stunned. Mark stepped between us then, whispering for her to calm down. I turned and walked back into my house while they shouted on the lawn. I locked my door, leaned against it, and breathed out slowly. This was only the beginning. The real revenge, the legal, quiet, devastating kind, was about to unfold. And they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. Please make sure you're subscribed. I called Mark to come over the next morning. He arrived with Lila clinging to his arm. I led them to the driveway. "Since you love selling things that aren't yours," I said, "I thought I'd make a sale of my own." Mark frowned. "What sale?" I pointed to the empty space where his prized vintage car used to sit, the car he polished every weekend, car he bragged about owning. He gasped. Where is it?" I handed him the sales slip. "Sold," I said, "for $90,000. He shouted, "That was on my car." I shook my head. "No, it was in my name. You remember when you asked me to help with insurance years ago? You signed it over." His knees buckled, and he dropped onto the porch step. Lila backed away slowly. "Why would you do this?" he whispered. I looked at him with steady eyes. "Because you taught me that everything is just a transaction to you. So I made one of my own." His face crumpled. My revenge had only begun. Mark's face turned red as he stumbled to his feet. "You can't use that money," he shouted. I ignored him and walked to the kitchen where the paperwork lay neatly stacked. "I already have," I said. "I used the money to pay off every debt you owe." He blinked, confused. "What?" I slid the receipts toward him. "Your loans, your credit cards, the people you borrowed from. All paid." He looked almost relieved, until I added, "And now every joint account is closed. You no longer have access to anything of mine." His relief vanished. I placed my updated will on the table. "You are removed from it. Completely." He grabbed the papers and shook them. "You can't do this." His voice cracked. I felt steady and calm. "I already did." Lila stood by the door, silent, her eyes wide. She had wanted my house. Now she had nothing. Mark sank into a chair, gripping his hair. "Mom, please." I turned away. "This is the cost of betrayal, Mark." He had taught me to stop giving. I had finally learned. I invited the rest of the family to my house that weekend. They arrived curious, whispering as they took their seats in the living room. Mark and Lila walked in late, trying to look composed. I opened a folder and said, "I want to read my updated will." The room grew quiet. "Everything I own, the house, the savings, the land, will go to charity and my grandchild." People gasped. Mark shot up. You're doing this out of spite. I held up my hand. Sit. He did. I continued. Mark receives nothing. Then I looked at Lila. And you, dear, receive even less. Lila's jaw dropped. My relatives exchanged looks, confusion mixed with judgment. I saw the shock settle on Mark's face like a heavy blanket. This time there was no laughter, no arrogance. Only fear. Only the truth catching up. I closed the folder and said, "This is the result of actions, not anger." The room buzzed. Mark looked around, and for once, not a single person took his side. I stood and placed the next set of papers on the table. "These," I said, "are all the forged documents." Everyone leaned in. I showed them the fake signatures, the bank forms Mark tried to use, the insurance changes, and the messages where he called me forgetful and easy to control. My sister-in-law gasped. My brother stood up and muttered, "Unbelievable." Mark slumped lower in his seat. Lila tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I laid down the papers showing the attempted access to my accounts. Then the one with his forged digital signature on the house sale. The room turned cold. My cousin whispered, "You could have lost everything." I nodded. Because my son wanted money more than he wanted a mother. Mark covered his face with his hands. No one defended him. Not one word. His lies, now in the open, looked uglier under the bright living room light. For the first time, he realized people were seeing the truth, the real version of him he tried so hard to hide. Joe stepped forward then, pulling out his small speaker. "There's something else," he said. Mark looked up sharply, eyes wide. Joe pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room again, bragging about selling my house, calling me weak, laughing about controlling me. "Once the house is gone," he said in the recording, "she'll have to obey. She can't fight." My relatives stared in shock. Someone whispered, "How could he say that about his own mother?" Mark jumped up, shouting, "That's taken out of context." But the room was already turning against him. My niece folded her arms. My brother shook his head. Lila sank into the couch, moving her hand away from Mark's. The recording kept playing, the bragging, the cruelty, the clear intent. When it ended, the silence was heavy. Joe clicked off the speaker. I looked at Mark. "That was your voice. Your plan." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. All masks had fallen. Everyone finally saw him for who he was. And he knew it. The moment the family meeting ended, Lila stormed out of the house. Mark ran after her, calling her name. I watched from the doorway as they argued in the driveway. Lila's voice was sharp. "You told me we'd get the money. You promised the house." Mark begged her to calm down, but she pulled off her engagement ring and placed it in his hand. "I'm not marrying someone who lies about everything," she said. He looked stunned. She stepped back, folded her arms, and shook her head slowly. Then she got into her car and drove away without looking back. Mark stood alone in my driveway, staring at the ring like it had burned him. For years he chased her approval, her plans, her wants. Now she had walked off the moment the money disappeared. He looked up at me helplessly. "Mama," she left. I said nothing. His own choices had taken what he valued most. His scheme had crumbled, and this was only the start of his downfall. Lila didn't stay quiet for long. 2 days later, she posted a long breakup announcement online. She wrote that she couldn't continue with someone who lies, manipulates, and has deep emotional issues. She made sure everyone knew she left him, not the other way around. Within hours, the comments section exploded. People from their friend group wrote things like, "Wow, Mark? Seriously?" and didn't know he was like that. Some posted laughing emojis. Someone even wrote, "I heard he tried to sell his mom's house behind her back." Mark's reputation fell apart in real time, brick by brick. He tried replying, defending himself, but every comment made things worse. Screenshots spread fast. I watched quietly from my kitchen table. I didn't feel joy, just a strange, calm justice. Mark had humiliated me in front of strangers during the house listing. Now the world was seeing the truth about him, and all I had done was tell the truth and protect myself. His lies finally cracked open for everyone to see. 2 days later, Mark came to my house to collect the last of his things. Movers hauled boxes out, each one a piece of the life he thought he controlled. He stood on the porch looking small and tired. His voice was soft when he said, "Mom, where will I go?" I looked at him for a long moment. He had taken my trust, my peace, and tried to take my home. He had threatened me, lied about me, and used my love like a bank account. I stepped forward and said, "You're an adult, Mark. You'll figure it out." His eyes filled with tears. "Please don't do this," he whispered. But I turned and walked inside. I closed the door gently, not angrily. It clicked shut like the last page of a book. I leaned against the wood for a quiet moment. I wasn't shutting him out of a home. He had shut himself out long ago. Now the house he tried to steal stood firm, and I stayed standing in it. Strong. That afternoon I had the locks changed. A new metal plate, new keys, even a new alarm system. The house felt safer, lighter. When the locksmith left, I sat on my porch drinking tea, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in weeks. That calm lasted until I noticed an envelope resting on the step. My name was written on it in Mark's handwriting. I picked it up slowly and carried it inside. For a moment I wondered if it was another threat, another demand. I opened it carefully. Inside was a long letter, filled with shaky words about regret, about feeling lost, about being ashamed. But near the end I saw it. "Maybe you can help me, just until I get on my feet." There it was. Another ask. Another hand reaching into my life for money. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. I didn't feel anger this time. Only clarity. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone to call Joe. Joe arrived with 2 cups of coffee. I handed him the letter, and he read it with a sigh. "He's sorry," Joe said, "but he also wants more." I nodded. He always wants more. I walked to the trash can, held the letter above it, and paused for a moment. The old version of me, the one who always rescued, always forgave, always gave, wanted to save him again. But the woman I had become knew better. I dropped the letter into the trash. The sound felt final. Joe smiled gently. "You did the right thing." I poured myself more coffee and felt something lift off my shoulders. I didn't know Mark my safety or my home. I didn't know him my freedom. I sat back down, looked at the sunlight on my kitchen floor, and finally felt like the house belonged to me again. Not because the papers said so, but because I chose to protect it and myself. With the quiet returning, I decided to fix the things in the house I had ignored for years. I used part of the money from selling Mark's car, the same money he had planned to steal, to repaint the living room and repair the deck. Workers came in smiling, telling me how lovely the home felt. Their kindness soothed something inside me. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I found my husband's old toolbox tucked behind boxes. I sat cross-legged on the floor, running my fingers across its scratched lid. Inside were his tools, perfectly arranged just like he kept them. A small folded note rested on top. "If you ever feel lost, build something." I closed my eyes and smiled. I felt him near me, steady and warm. The house smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. I held the toolbox against my chest and whispered, "I'm building again. I'm finally building again." And for the first time since he passed, the memories comforted instead of hurting. Later that evening, I carried the toolbox downstairs and placed it on my kitchen table. I opened it and remembered how my husband taught Mark to hammer nails straight and measure twice before cutting wood. I remember the laughter, the soft talks, the lessons of patience and honesty. Those memories warmed me, but also made the bitter truth clearer. My husband had taught our son right. Mark had simply chosen not to follow those lessons. I traced the handle of a worn screwdriver and heard my husband's voice in my mind. "Never let anyone take what's yours." Back then, I thought he meant tools or money. Now I understood he meant dignity, peace, and self-respect. I smiled gently and closed the box. Healing didn't feel like a sudden joy. It felt like this. Quiet, steady earned. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. The house felt safe. My heart felt steady, and I knew I was ready for whatever came next. A week later, Mark showed up at my gate. He looked smaller, thinner, humbled. He didn't try to enter. He just stood there. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry. Truly." His voice shook. "I know I hurt you." I stepped outside but kept the gate between us. He wiped his eyes and whispered, "I need forgiveness." I nodded slowly. "Forgiveness is possible," I said. His face brightened. "But," I continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean access." His smile faded. What does that mean? I looked at him steadily. It means I forgive you in my heart, but I will not give you money, my house, or control of my life ever again. He swallowed hard. Can we at least start over? I shook my head gently. You chose your path. Now you must walk it. I closed the gate softly. He didn't shout this time. He simply whispered, "Goodbye, Mom," and walked away. I felt sorrow, yes, but also strength. The boundary held. The next day, I visited my lawyer again and updated my will one final time. I removed Mark completely, but I didn't stop there. I added someone else, my grandchild, Mark's child, a sweet, bright little girl who once ran through my garden chasing butterflies. She had never lied to me, never stolen from me, never tried to harm me. She was innocent in all of this. I wanted my legacy to go to someone who still knew love without greed. When the papers were signed, Miss Carter said, "This is your choice. Your future." I mailed a sealed copy to my granddaughter's guardian with a simple note. For her future. For her goodness. As I left the office, a weight lifted from me. My husband's wishes, my own heart, and my home were finally aligned. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was shaping the future in a better way. A way Mark could no longer twist. By early fall, my home looked new again. Fresh paint, repaired stairs, bright flowers in the yard. I decided to host a backyard gathering for the people who had stood by me, Joe, my neighbors, even the kind workers who fixed my home. We grilled food, shared stories, and laughed until the stars came out. At sunset, Joe raised a glass. "To her," he said. To a woman who refused to be pushed down, who fought back with strength and grace. Everyone clapped, and I felt my cheeks warm. I looked around at the glowing faces, the soft lantern lights, the safe yard, and realized something. This was the family I chose. Not blood, but loyalty. Not obligation, but love. I breathed in the warm night air and felt whole again. For the first time in a long while, joy filled my chest instead of fear. I whispered to myself, "This is home." And it truly was again. As the evening faded and everyone left, I stood on my porch alone, watching the quiet street. My house, my husband's house, stood strong around me. I ran my fingers along the railing he once repaired and felt a soft pride rise in my chest. A voice formed inside me, steady and true. He tried to sell the roof over my head, so I sold the wheels he loved more than his own mother. And in the end, I kept my home and my dignity. I stepped inside, locked the new door, and let the silence of peace settle around me. No more fear. No more threats. No more lies. Just the steady truth that I had fought for myself and won. I curled up on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs, and smiled into the quiet. Justice wasn't loud. It was this calm, safe night in the home I kept. My future was my own again. My story was mine to write now. If you love this story, make sure you hit subscribe for more true revenge stories.